Thank you for calling that out. So as I've mentioned, I've worked with organizations and I've seen firsthand how some of these organizations struggle with adoption and morale and performance. So about 5 years ago, I wondered how organizations can achieve digital transformation without exhausting the very people that make it possible. Because what I'm seeing is that the systems designed to create efficiency can sometimes also create exhaustion for the people on the ground. So my goal was to understand where that tipping point is, and to explore how smarter working can deliver not just better outcomes for organizations, but also better experiences for people going through the change. Um, there is already a lot of research in the private sector showing clear links between flexibility, autonomy, and digital tools with positive outcomes associated with better level of engagements, higher innovation levels, productivity. And much of this work sits within two key frameworks, the job demands resources model and self-determination theory. But when we move into the public sector, that story changes, especially for government organizations in the UK. These are big, complex, hierarchical, not-for-profit organizations with layers of accountability, where decisions are shaped by public scrutiny to deliver better value for money. Political priorities play into this, lots of procedural rules. So the same assumptions that come from the private sector don't always hold up in this context. Also, smarter working has become a policy term used across government departments and agencies, but most of the existing evidence is descriptive rather than empirical. It tells us what organizations are doing, but not necessarily how it affects people and the performance. So the gap I wanted to fill was this, does smarter working actually improve performance? And if so, how? My study looked at whether the key lies in people's well-being, which is my mediating variable. In other words, do things like satisfaction and stress explain the link between smarter working and performance? I also wanted to test whether HR practices, my moderator in this case, change how strong these effects are. I looked at things like fairness, recognition, developmental opportunities. And so this is where my study contributes theoretically, by integrating the two frameworks to explain both motivational and strain in smarter working. And I tested those ideas in a real world context with public sector organizations who arguably need smarter working the most. They're increasingly under pressure to do more with less, where resources are tight and change fatigue is high. But before I go deeper into some of the findings and my methodology, it might be helpful to establish what we mean by smarter working. It is often used loosely and interchangeably with other similar terms like agile working or flexible working. So in this context, smarter working is really about how work is being designed, and it's built on four key principles, giving people autonomy to decide where and when work happens, using technology as an enabler to make work easier, focusing on outcomes, not hours, certainly not physical presence, and making sure HR systems, things like recognition and developmental systems, reinforce trust, fairness, and support. It's not the same as flexible working. It's not about where people work. Smarter working is really about how intelligently organizations design the work so that they can balance autonomy, collaboration, and accountability, ultimately bringing the best out of people. And this distinction is really important in this context of digital transformation, because when change is designed well, smarter working acts as a job resource, increasing satisfaction, increasing learning and innovation. But when it's implemented poorly, it becomes a job demand, increasing pressure, isolation, and cognitive overload. And it's precisely that tension that my research examines empirically. So to explore this, I organized a quantitative study across two leading public sector organizations in the UK within the transport sector. The sample included 400 plus employees of operational, HR, digital, and support roles, and varying levels of seniority, which gave me a cross-sectional view. Then combining SPSS and smart PLS, I looked at two things, whether smarter working improves performance directly, and whether well-being mediates the link between smarter working and performance. Then I also tested whether HRM practices moderated these effects. In other words, if they made these effects stronger or amplified them. The model explained around 42% of the variance in job performance, which I suppose is a very good level of explanation for this type of behavioral data. So what I deduced from that is this, the direct effect between smarter working and job performance was weak and statistically insignificant, but the indirect effect through well-being was both strong and significant. So in other words, as drawn out in this heading of the slide, smarter working improves performance only when it improves well-being. So higher satisfaction and lower stress are the conversion points. Job satisfaction turned out to be the strongest pathway. It explained most of the positive effect. Stress, on the other hand, had a negative effect, eroding some of those benefits. And HR practices played into this, an important moderating role in teams where people felt they were treated fairly, recognized, and developed. Smarter working led to better outcomes. So what this tells me is that technology and flexibility don't automatically create performance. It's people's experiences of trust, fairness, and clarity that does. And that brings me to the core argument of my research, which is that well-being is not the outcome of effective transformation. It's the infrastructure that makes it work. In other words, as change practitioners, in my line of work, when I go in and implement digital transformations, we often talk about well-being as something we measure after the fact, as a signal of how people are coping with change or how it has improved people's well-being. But what the data shows is that well-being isn't a result. It's the precondition to get there. And so when people feel good, engaged, and clear about what's expected of them, they tend to have more energy, focus, and creativity, and that energy is what drives real performance. In the public sector, where there is multiple constraints, protecting that human energy should be seen not just as a moral responsibility or a HR metric, but a strategic one. So organizations that design smarter working systems around trust and fairness and autonomy are effectively building performance capacity into their operating model. Now, what does that mean in practice? And how can change practitioners and leaders apply some of this? The first thing is to design more intelligently. That means giving people a bit more freedom to decide how they deliver their workload. Secondly, make fairness something people can see. In nearly every organization I've worked with, trust goes up and falls on how fair people think decisions are, specifically around workload and recognition and who gets opportunities. And people don't expect perfection, but they do expect some level of transparency. And so when leaders explain the why behind decisions, that will make a huge difference. Third, protect people's energy like you protect performance or track budgets. It's easy to measure output, but it's much harder to track energy. But that's what actually drives result over time. Quick pulse checks, short team huddles, or even simple questions like, how's everyone coping? That can help leaders spot fatigue early before it becomes burnout. Fourth, align systems with people. This means looking at HR, IT, and leadership together, so that organizations align those systems and everything works in harmony, where tools, structures, and culture all reinforce the same behavior. And finally, use data not just to measure how well we are delivering change, but also to inform decisions about workload and satisfaction and stress. If the data shows fatigue is rising or satisfaction is falling, that should be seen as a performance issue, not a well-being one. And none of these steps here are costly or revolutionary. They are small shifts in mindset and habit, but they do make a huge difference in whether transformation feels empowering or exhausting for those living through it. So to wrap it up, the study contributes in two main ways. One, it shows that smarter working only drives performance when people's well-being improves. Satisfaction and stress are the bridge. Two, it highlights that HRM practices aren't just nice to have, they are the multipliers that make smarter working succeed. For researchers, this extends our understanding of how digital and human systems interact in complex public organizations. For practitioners, it's really just a reminder that transformation is about more than systems. It's about thoughtful work design, and this study hopefully offers evidence on how smarter working can support people and performance. So that's it. Technology doesn't create performance. People do, and work is designed to let them thrive. Thank you very much for the time once again. I'd love to hear your thoughts and happy to answer any questions you might have.